He walked into that boardroom knowing a single rejection would mean losing the only home he could give his daughter. What he didn't know was that the homemade lunchbox they were laughing at held a secret worth more than the entire company. This is the story of a single father, a billion-dollar secret, and the moment a quiet man with nothing to lose changed the future of food forever. His name was Alex Rourke, a widowed father and former food scientist who'd spent 3 years working in a cramped garage laboratory. He was there to pitch a solution to global food waste, a problem costing the world nearly $1 trillion a year. But to the executives at Viridian Foods, he was just another desperate inventor with a kid's lunchbox. They were about to learn that the greatest breakthroughs often arrive in the most humble packages. The story of that lunchbox didn't begin in a boardroom. It began 3 years earlier in a quiet suburban kitchen with a single strawberry. Alex Rourke had been a rising star at Agritech Solutions, a company dedicated to extending the shelf life of produce for supermarket chains. His specialty was high-pressure processing, the method that uses immense pressure, not heat, to kill bacteria. But in 2018, his world fractured. His wife, Elena, was diagnosed with a rare, aggressive cancer. The treatments were brutal, the medical bills catastrophic. Alex took a leave of absence, draining their savings to be by her side for 14 months until she passed. He returned to work a ghost, and 6 months later, during a routine cost-cutting purge, Agritech let him go. The official reason was redundancy. The truth, his manager admitted with awkward sympathy, was that he'd lost his killer instinct. The fire was gone. At 42, Alex was unemployed, grieving, and solely responsible for his 7-year-old daughter, Chloe. The downward spiral was quiet and efficient. The savings evaporated. He sold Elena's car, then his own. The house their home was next. On a grey Tuesday in March, packing up the kitchen, Alex made Chloe a sandwich for lunch. He reached for a strawberry from the fridge, but it was already soft, leaking a faint pink juice onto the shelf. It had been fresh 2 days ago. He stood there, holding the spoiled fruit, and a specific, crushing despair washed over him. He was a scientist who dedicated his career to preventing this exact moment, this small, stupid waste, and he couldn't even afford to keep fresh food in the fridge for his own child. That was the spark. If the industrial-scale HPP units he'd worked on were too massive and expensive, what about something small, something that could sit on a kitchen counter or even inside a lunchbox? The scientific principle was sound. Intense, sudden pressure disrupts microbial cell structures, but all the engineering said it required monstrous steel chambers and industrial hydraulic pumps. It was impossible to miniaturize. Everyone in the field knew that. Alex, with nothing left to lose, decided to prove everyone wrong. He converted his garage into a makeshift lab, funded by the last of his severance pay. His goal wasn't just preservation, it was perfect preservation. No loss of texture, no cooked flavor, no nutritional damage. He called it suspended freshness. For Chloe, he made it a game. He'd put slices of apple in his prototype containers, and she'd be the taste test judge days later. "Crispy, Daddy," she'd announce, and that became his metric for success. But the garage project devoured money. He took on freelance technical writing, often working through the night after Chloe was asleep. The landlord of their small apartment started asking about the strange hum coming from the garage. And then the real crisis hit. Chloe's asthma, always manageable, took a severe turn. Her pediatrician insisted on a new, advanced inhaler and a stricter monitoring regime. The cost was $300 a month, insurance notwithstanding. Alex looked at his bank account, then at the half-dismantled pressure regulator on his workbench. He had 8 weeks before he'd have to choose between the next rent payment and Chloe's medicine. Desperation forced his hand. He needed an investor, and he needed one now. He compiled a list of every mid-sized food technology firm in the region. He sent out 37 carefully crafted emails, attaching his preliminary data on microbial reduction and nutrient retention. 36 went unanswered. The 37th was an automated rejection from a venture capital firm. One response, however, wasn't an email. It was a phone call 2 weeks later from a number he didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional. "Mr. Rourke, this is Evelyn Shaw, executive assistant to Mr. David Kiernan, CEO of Viridian Foods. We came across your proposal." Mr. Kiernan would like to invite you to our quarterly innovation review this Friday. Can you be in the city by 9 a.m.? Viridian Foods, it was a name he knew well, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate with a portfolio of snack brands and frozen foods. They weren't a tech incubator, they were a corporate titan. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a lottery ticket. Alex's hands shook as he confirmed he had 4 days. There was one monumental problem. His working prototype was not boardroom ready. It was a jumble of polished aluminum chambers, repurposed solenoid valves, and a network of wires connected to a modified car battery. It was science, not product. It looked, as his brother had joked once, like a bomb. He couldn't walk into Viridian's sleek headquarters with that. So he worked. For 96 hours, with caffeine and panic as fuel, he engineered a disguise. He took the core pressure chamber, a small cylindrical vessel no bigger than a soda can, and housed it within a standard insulated stainless steel lunchbox. He routed the controls to a simple touchpad on the side, masking the wiring underneath a layer of food-safe polymer. The battery pack was fitted into the base. It was clunky, it was unconventional, but it worked. He could place a cluster of grapes inside, activate the sequence, and they would emerge a week later as if just picked. He packed it carefully, alongside a single, perfect apple he'd treated 3 days prior as a demonstration sample. The morning of the meeting, he dressed in the only presentable clothes he had left, a clean plaid shirt and slacks. He helped Chloe with her inhaler, promising her a special treat if his big meeting went well. Her trust was a weight in his chest. The commute to the city felt like a dream. The Viridian Tower was a glass monolith, a temple of money and power he was about to walk into as a supplicant. In the soaring lobby, he was met by Evelyn Shaw, a woman in her 30s whose efficient smile didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Rourke, they're ready for you. Please follow me." She led him to a private elevator that ascended silently to the executive floor. The boardroom door was a slab of dark, polished wood. Evelyn pushed it open. And there they were. At the far end of a table that looked like a sheet of black ice sat 3 people. David Kiernan, the CEO, was in his 50s with a bored, evaluating gaze. Next to him was Sarah Chen, the blonde head of product development, her expression sharp and impatient. And to her right, leaning back with his arms crossed, was Marcus Thorne, the CFO, a man whose smirk seemed permanently etched onto his face. Their eyes swept over Alex, taking in his simple shirt, his nervous posture, and finally, landing on the plain metal lunchbox in his hand. Kiernan spoke first, his voice a low rumble. "Mr. Rourke, we're told you have a solution for spoilage. My team allocates millions to R&D for this very problem." He gestured vaguely at the room. "So, I'm intrigued. What's in the lunchbox?" Alex felt every ounce of moisture leave his mouth. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. He set the lunchbox down on the immense table with a soft, pathetic clink. And Marcus Thorne, the CFO, let out a short, derisive laugh. "Seriously, you brought your kids' lunch to a $90 billion pitch meeting." The laughter hung in the air, sharp and condescending. Alex felt his face grow hot, but he kept his eyes locked on David Kiernan, the CEO. The man hadn't laughed. He was just watching, waiting. "It's not my lunch, Mr. Thorne," Alex said, his voice steadier than he felt. He addressed the CFO, but his words were for Kiernan. "It's the prototype, the solution you spend millions trying to find." Sarah Chen, the product head, leaned forward, her blonde hair brushing the table. "You've miniaturized a stabilization process into a lunchbox." It wasn't a question, it was a statement of disbelief. "Not just any process," Alex said, flipping the latches on the box. The soft click echoed in the quiet room. "High-pressure processing. Industrial HPP requires units the size of a car and 600 megapascals of pressure. My system generates the equivalent effective pressure in a chamber the size of a soda can, using a fraction of the energy. It doesn't cook the food. It doesn't use chemicals. It suspends decay at the cellular level." He lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in a molded tray, was the core aluminum cylinder, connected to a small touchpad with a simple digital display. Wires ran neatly to the battery pack in the base. It was still obviously a prototype, but it was clearly engineered, not cobbled together. Next to it lay a single, perfect red, delicious apple. Marcus Thorne, the CFO, snorted. A magic apple, wonderful. We have quarterly earnings in 3 weeks, David. Is this really the best use of our time? Kiernan held up a hand, silencing him. His eyes hadn't left the lunchbox. Demonstrate. Alex's fingers trembled slightly as he entered the activation code on the pad. A low, almost inaudible hum filled the chamber. The digital display cycled through a 10-second countdown. He'd done this 1,000 times in his garage, but never under this kind of gaze. The hum ceased. A soft hiss of equalizing pressure followed. He opened the small chamber door and removed the apple. It looked ordinary. He placed it on the black table, where it seemed to glow against the dark surface. The apple was treated 72 hours ago, Alex said. Without this process, it would be showing significant softening by now. Please, examine it. Sarah Chen was the first to move. She picked up the apple, turning it in her hands. She pressed her thumb against its skin. Firm, she looked at Alex. Do you have a control? An untreated apple from the same batch. This was the moment he'd hoped for. From his worn satchel, he withdrew a small plastic container. Inside was another apple, visibly softer, its skin slightly wrinkled. He placed it beside the first. The difference was stark. The treated apple looked like it had been bought an hour ago. The control looked like it had been forgotten in a fruit bowl for a week. A heavy silence settled over the room. The smirk had vanished from Marcus Thorne's face, replaced by a calculating frown. David Kiernan stood up slowly and walked around the table. He took the treated apple from Sarah. He didn't squeeze it. He simply held it, his expression unreadable. Shelf life extension, Kiernan asked, his voice quiet. Dramatic, Alex replied, the scientific data surfacing through his nerves. For high-moisture fruits, berries, leafy greens, we're seeing a 10 to 15-fold increase in visual and textural freshness. Microbial load is reduced to near zero. It's not indefinite, but it shifts the timeline from days to weeks, even for the most delicate produce. Weeks, Sarah Chen breathed, her mind clearly racing through supply chain implications. The logistics, the reduction in transport refrigeration alone. The patent, Kiernan interrupted, still looking at the apple. Status. Alex's stomach tightened. Provisional application filed. Full utility patent is in preparation. The core innovation is the miniaturization of the pressure generation system. It's a novel electromagnetic actuator design, not a scaled-down hydraulic pump. Kiernan finally looked at him. You built this alone, in a garage. Yes. And you're here because you need capital to scale it. Alex nodded, deciding honesty was his only currency. To build a pre-production model, to run the full battery of FDA and food safety tests, and he paused, the personal crashing into the professional. To secure my daughter's healthcare, this isn't just a project for me, it's the only way forward. The raw admission changed the room's energy again. Pity flickered in Sarah's eyes. Marcus Thorne looked annoyed, as if personal struggle was an unprofessional distraction. But Kiernan's gaze remained analytical, weighing the man along with the machine. Leave the prototype, Kiernan said, placing the apple back on the table. And the documentation, my technical team will evaluate it. You'll have our decision within 48 hours. It wasn't a yes, it wasn't a no, it was a stay of execution. Alex carefully repacked the lunchbox, his hands now steady. The initial mockery had been burned away by the demonstration, leaving behind a tense, professional curiosity. As he was led out by Evelyn Shaw, he felt their eyes on his back. The door closed behind him, leaving his invention and his fate in the hands of strangers. The 48-hour wait was an agony of silence. He jumped every time his phone buzzed, but it was only reminders for Chloe's inhaler or spam. He tried to work in the garage but couldn't focus. He replayed every word, every expression. Had Sarah Chen's interest been genuine? Had Kiernan seen past the humble packaging? Marcus Thorne's dismissive laugh echoed in his mind, a warning bell. On the morning of the second day, the call came. It was Evelyn Shaw again. Mr. Rourke. Mr. Kiernan was impressed with the technical demonstration. He's prepared to make an offer. Can you return to the offices at 3 p.m.? An offer, the words were a lifeline. Alex's heart hammered against his ribs. He called Chloe's school, arranging for her to go to a friend's house after class. He put on the same plaid shirt, a silent superstition. The train ride back to the city felt entirely different. The glass tower no longer seemed like a fortress, it looked like a gateway. This time he was ushered into a smaller, more intimate conference room. Only two people waited for him, David Kiernan and Sarah Chen. The lunchbox prototype sat on the table between them. Kiernan gestured for him to sit. "Your technology is legitimate, Rourke," Kiernan began, no small talk. "My engineers have pored over your schematics. The actuator design is, as you said, novel. The potential applications are significant, not just in consumer goods, but in medical supply preservation, military rations, humanitarian aid. You've stumbled onto something far bigger than fresh apples." Alex's breath caught. This was beyond his wildest hopes. "However," Sarah Chen continued, her tone careful, "it is a prototype, a brilliant proof of concept, but years away from market readiness. The safety certification path is long and expensive. The manufacturing challenges for the core component are substantial. Viridian cannot invest in a garage project. We invest in assets." Kiernan slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "This is our offer. Viridian Foods will purchase 100% of the intellectual property related to this device and the underlying technology. We will pay you a lump sum of $200,000. In return, you will sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and a non-compete clause barring you from working in food preservation technology for the next 5 years." The numbers hung in the air, $200,000. It was more money than Alex had seen in years. It would clear his debts, secure an apartment, cover Chloe's medical needs for a long time. It was safety, it was survival. But it was also a sale, a complete surrender. He would own nothing of the thing he'd built. The intellectual property, the patents, the future, all of it would belong to Viridian. He would be paid off and silenced. "The offer is generous, considering the current state of development," Sarah added, though her voice lacked conviction. She was delivering terms, not endorsing them. Alex stared at the paper. The legal language blurred. 200,000, a life raft. But he thought of the apple on the black table. He thought of the tenfold extension, the energy savings, the potential to change how food moved across the planet. He thought of his daughter, not just her asthma, but the world she would inherit. Was he selling a future for a present? He started, his voice rough. "I need to think about this." Kiernan's expression hardened just slightly. "There is no think, Rourke. The offer is on the table now. It expires at 5 p.m. today. This is not a negotiation. This is an exit. Take the money, solve your problems, and walk away. Or take your lunchbox back to your garage and see how far you get when word gets out that Viridian passed on your little science project." The threat was clear. If he said no, they would blackball him. No other company would touch technology dismissed by a giant like Viridian. It was a buyout or a burial. "Why the urgency?" Alex asked, a sliver of his scientific mind cutting through the panic. Kiernan and Sarah exchanged a glance. It was Sarah who answered, her professionalism slipping to reveal a hint of frustration. "Because our quarterly innovation review is more than a show and tell, Mr. Rourke. It's a battlefield. Marcus Thorne is presenting a proposal to acquire Freshlock, a startup with a chemical coating that extends shelf life by 3 days. Its numbers look good on a spreadsheet. Your technology threatens to make that multi-million-dollar acquisition look obsolete before the ink is dry. David is risking internal capital to secure this before Thorne can rally the board against it." The pivot was sudden and devastating. Alex wasn't just an inventor in a meeting, he was a pawn in a corporate civil war. His technology was a weapon Kiernan wanted to own before his CFO could destroy it. "So this isn't an investment in innovation," Alex said slowly. "It's a preemptive strike. You want to own it so no one else can have it, even if you never develop it." Kiernan didn't deny it. "Business is war, Rourke. Your invention has strategic value. My offer monetizes that value for you. Today, what you do with it after 5 o'clock is of no concern to me." The lifeline had turned into a leash. The money was real. The security for Chloe was real. But selling felt like betraying the very reason he'd started, to solve a problem, not to become a footnote in a corporate skirmish. He looked at the lunchbox, then at the offer sheet. The clock on the wall ticked toward 4. He had 1 hour to decide between saving his daughter's present and salvaging his own future. At 4:59 p.m., Alex Rourke picked up the offer sheet, looked David Kiernan in the eye, and tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper was shockingly loud in the quiet room. Sarah Chen inhaled sharply. David Kiernan's face went utterly still, a mask of cold fury. "You're making a mistake you cannot afford, Rourke." "It's my mistake to make," Alex said, gathering his prototype. His hands were steady. The panic had burned away, replaced by a clear, cold certainty. He couldn't sell the future, not even for Chloe. He had to believe there was another way. "Thank you for your time." He walked out of the conference room, through the silent executive floor, and into the elevator. He didn't breathe until he was on the street, the cold air hitting his face. He had just turned down $200,000. He had no plan B. The weight of that decision settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. The retaliation was swift and surgical. By 10 a.m. the next morning, his inbox was flooded with polite, nearly identical rejection emails from the other 36 companies he'd originally contacted. Word had traveled. Viridian had blackballed him. His phone, which had been silent for weeks, rang with a call from a patent lawyer he'd consulted months ago. "Alex, it's Martin. Listen, I just got a very aggressive inquiry from Viridian's legal team. They're challenging the novelty of your provisional patent, citing prior art from a failed Japanese project in the 90s. They're trying to create a paper trail to invalidate your filing before it even gets examined." It was a classic corporate strangulation technique. Tie him up in legal battles he couldn't afford to fight. Without a solid patent, his invention was just a neat trick. That same afternoon, his landlord called. "Alex, I've had some complaints about the noise, the electrical draw from the garage. I'm afraid I can't renew your lease next month." The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Viridian was applying pressure on every front. A week passed in a blur of dread. Alex packed up their apartment, the reality of his decision crushing him. He used the last of his cash to put their belongings in storage and booked a cheap motel room for him and Chloe. He lied to her, telling her it was an adventure. She was smart enough to see through it, but brave enough not to say so. Then a crack of light. An email arrived from an address he didn't recognize, Sarah Chen at Viridian.com. The subject line was blank. The body contained only a link to a private video conference and a time, 8 p.m. that night. No other text. It could be a trap. It could be more humiliation. But with nothing left to lose, Alex logged on at the appointed time. Sarah Chen's face filled his laptop screen. She was at home, in a cozy-looking living room, her professional demeanor softened by worry. "They can't know I'm talking to you," she said without preamble, her voice low. "What you did in that room, it was the bravest thing I've seen in 10 years at that company, and the stupidest." "Why are you calling, Sarah?" Alex asked, weary. "Because Kiernan is wrong, and Thorne's pet project Freshlock is a ticking time bomb." She leaned closer to the camera. "I pushed for our labs to do a deep dive on their chemical coating. The active compound is a derivative of a fungicide that breaks down into a known allergen under certain temperature conditions. It hasn't been caught because their testing protocol is flawed. If it goes to market, people get sick. Lawsuits follow. Viridian's reputation gets shredded." Alex's mind raced. "So Kiernan is rushing to acquire a defective product to block my technology, which is safer and better." "Exactly. He's so focused on winning the internal war against Thorne that he's blind to the real risk. I tried to raise the red flag, but the acquisition is too far along. The board vote is in 72 hours. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You need to go public, not with the technology details, but with the story. A single father inventor crushed by a corporate giant for a better idea. The court of public opinion is the only court you can afford right now." It was a dangerous gambit. Going public would burn every remaining bridge in the industry, but it was also the only weapon he had left. Sarah gave him the contact information for a tech journalist at a major online publication, someone she trusted to handle the story fairly. "Her name is Anya Desai. Tell her everything, and for God's sake, get a better lawyer." The next 48 hours were a whirlwind. He reached out to Anya, who was immediately intrigued. He found a new lawyer through a pro bono innovators network, a sharp young attorney named Leo who understood patent law and loved an underdog story. And he worked tirelessly, preparing a public demonstration that was too compelling to ignore. He chose a local farmer's market as his stage. On a bright Saturday morning, with Anya and her camera crew present, he set up a simple table. On one side, he placed a container of strawberries treated with his prototype a week prior. On the other, strawberries bought that morning from a vendor. Then he brought out a third container, strawberries coated with a sample of the fresh lock chemical provided by a discreet source, likely Sarah Chen. He invited people to compare. The fresh lock berries looked shiny, perfect, but had a faint chemical odor. His own berries looked and smelled perfectly fresh. Then he did something Anya suggested. He used a simple consumer allergen test strip, available at any pharmacy, and wiped it on the fresh lock berries. The strip turned a definite, alarming pink, indicating the presence of the allergen derivative Sarah had warned about. Anya's article went live that evening. The headline was brutal. Big Food tried to bury this dad's invention. His lunchbox might save your life. It wove together his personal story, the David and Goliath struggle with Viridian, and the potentially dangerous alternative they were pushing forward. The story went viral by midnight. The fallout was immediate and chaotic. Viridian's stock dipped in after-hours trading. News outlets picked up the story. The FDA announced it would review FreshLock's testing data. The Viridian board emergency postponed the acquisition vote. And then Alex's phone rang again. This time it was David Kiernan. The CEO's voice was strained, stripped of its earlier arrogance. "Rourke, you've made your point. There's a car outside your motel. Get in. We need to talk. Alone." This wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. Alex looked at Chloe, asleep in the motel bed. He thought about Sarah's warning, about the lengths a cornered corporation might go to. But he also knew this might be his only chance to negotiate from a position of strength. He told Leo, his lawyer, to track his location via his phone and call the police if he didn't check in every 30 minutes. Then he walked out into the night. The car was a black sedan. The driver said nothing. They didn't go to the Viridian Tower. They drove to a private airfield on the city's outskirts. A small jet waited on the tarmac, its engines whining. Kiernan stood at the bottom of the steps, illuminated by the plane's interior light. "Get in, we are going to Seattle." "Why?" "Because the one man who can save your invention, and possibly my company, refuses to come to New York. And after your little stunt, he's the only one who can broker peace." "Who?" "Nathaniel Croft." The name hit Alex like a thunderclap. Nathaniel Croft was the reclusive, legendary founder of Croft Ventures, a venture capital firm that only invested in world-changing technologies. He was a myth in the industry. He hadn't taken a public meeting in over 5 years. "He saw the article," Kiernan said, a note of grudging respect in his voice. "He contacted me directly. He wants to see the prototype, and he wants to see you. This is no longer a fight between you and Viridian, Rourke. This is an audition for the future of food, and we are both on stage." As the jet climbed into the night sky, Alex stared out the window at the disappearing city lights. He had wanted an investor, a partner. He had unleashed a media storm and caught the attention of a titan. But as he looked at Kiernan's tense profile across the cabin, he understood the new reality. He was no longer just fighting for his daughter's home. He was holding the leash of a billion-dollar crisis, and Nathaniel Croft wasn't coming to save him. He was coming to decide who, in this wreckage, was worth saving. Nathaniel Croft's home wasn't in downtown Seattle. It was on a secluded island in the Puget Sound, accessible only by boat or air. The jet landed on a private strip carved into a forest of evergreen trees. A modified golf cart, silent and electric, carried Alex and a silent, brooding David Kiernan along a winding path to a long, low house made of glass and reclaimed timber. It felt less like a mansion and more like an observatory built into the earth. Nathaniel Croft met them at the door. He was in his 70s, dressed in worn khakis and a wool sweater, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He didn't greet Kiernan. He looked directly at Alex, at the metal lunchbox held tightly in his hands. "The man with the magic lunchbox, come in. Let's see if the reality matches the story." The interior was a museum of technological history and natural beauty. One wall was a bookshelf containing first editions of scientific journals. Another was all glass, looking out onto a stormy sea. In the center of the main room stood a long wooden table. Croft gestured to it. "Place it there, and explain it to me, not as a salesman, as the man who built it in his garage." For the next hour, Alex did just that. He dismantled the lunchbox, showing the core chamber, the electromagnetic actuator, the power system. He talked about pressure curves and microbial log reduction and cellular integrity. He spoke of strawberries and Chloe and the desperate hope that had fueled every late-night solder joint. Kiernan stood by the window, a silent spectator to his own potential ruin. When Alex finished, Croft was quiet for a long time. He picked up the central chamber, feeling its weight. "Elegant," he said finally, "a reduction of principle to its simplest, purest form. Industry tries to add complexity. You stripped it away." He turned to Kiernan. "David, your company was going to pay $200,000 for this." Kiernan straightened. It was a fair valuation for an unproven prototype with significant development hurdles. "It was theft," Croft said mildly, but the words cut like a blade. "You weren't buying technology, you were buying a problem and making it disappear. Then you tried to crush the man when he refused to be erased. A poor strategy. It tends to make heroes out of inventors and villains out of CEOs." The atmosphere in the room tightened. Kiernan's jaw worked. "What would you have done?" "I would have partnered with him," Croft said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You have the distribution, the manufacturing, the regulatory teams. He has the genius. Together, you could have owned the next decade of food logistics. Instead, you created a scandal that has shaved millions off your market cap and put your board into open revolt." He turned back to Alex. "What do you want, Alex Rourke, truly?" Alex looked from the legendary investor to the humbled CEO. The answer came clear and whole. "I want to see it built. I want it to help farmers reduce waste, to help families keep food fresh longer, to make sure no one has to throw out a strawberry while their child is sick. And I want to provide for my daughter, not just survive, thrive." Croft nodded. "Good, specific, human. Now here is what will happen." He outlined a plan with the calm authority of a man who moved markets. Viridian would not purchase the technology. Instead, a new entity would be formed, Rourke Fresh Tech. Alex would own 51%. Viridian would own 49%, in exchange for an upfront investment of $5 million to fund final development, safety testing, and initial production setup. Viridian would also provide its manufacturing and distribution channels under a licensing agreement. David Kiernan would remain CEO of Viridian, but the Freshlock acquisition would be permanently scrapped. Sarah Chen would be installed as the head of the joint ventures development team. For Alex, it meant control. It meant wealth beyond the 200,000, a share in the future billions. For Kiernan, it was a lifeline. It salvaged a public relations disaster, brought a revolutionary product into Viridian's orbit, and neutralized the internal threat from Marcus Thorne, whose flawed acquisition strategy was now the center of the scandal. "This is not a negotiation," Croft said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "These are the terms. They are fair. They restore balance. You will both sign the term sheet my lawyers have already drafted, or you will leave this island with nothing but the consequences of your continued stubbornness." They signed. In the quiet of that glass room, with the Pacific wind howling outside, the war ended. Kiernan called his board from the terrace, his voice terse but compliant. Alex stepped outside and called Chloe at the motel. "We're going to be okay, Bug, more than okay." He couldn't explain it all, but she heard the smile in his voice and knew it was true. The following months were a blur of sanctioned, well-funded chaos. With the legal cloud lifted and capital flowing, Alex's garage project rapidly evolved. Sarah Chen, freed from Viridian's corporate politics, proved to be a brilliant operational partner. The prototype became the Everfresh Core. It was sleek, user-friendly, and designed first for commercial use: supermarket distribution centers, long-haul shipping containers, and restaurant supply chains. The press followed the story of the comeback. From Lunchbox to Lifeline, one headline read. Alex gave interviews, always steering the conversation toward the technology's potential to reduce global food waste, not just his personal drama. He was careful, guided by Croft's quiet advice, to never gloat over Viridian's defeat, framing it as a successful partnership born from a tough negotiation. This narrative helped Viridian's stock recover and cemented Alex's reputation as a principled innovator. The personal transformations were profound. Alex paid off every debt. He bought a small house with a big, sunlit room for Chloe and a proper detached workshop for himself. Chloe's asthma, managed with the best care available, became a minor concern rather than a constant emergency. On the first night in their new home, Alex made pancakes. They ate them at a real kitchen table, and the simple normalcy of it felt like a miracle. But the final surprise, the detail that closed the loop, came a year later. The Everfresh core had passed its first major FDA hurdle. A celebration was held at Viridian's headquarters, now a partnership showcase. All the principals were there: Alex, Sarah Chen, a subdued but respectful David Kiernan. Even Nathaniel Croft made a rare appearance. After the speeches, Croft took Alex aside. "You've done well. You held onto your integrity, which is more valuable than any patent. But there's something you should know." He handed Alex a faded photograph. It showed a younger Croft standing in a lab next to a massive, primitive steel pressure chamber. "In 1978, I was a young engineer. I had the same core idea you did: miniaturized pressure preservation. I worked on it for 5 years. I could never solve the actuator problem. The metallurgy wasn't there. The power systems were too crude. I filed it away as a beautiful, impossible dream." Alex stared at the photo, understanding dawning. "When you saw my story, I didn't just see an investment," Croft said, his eyes gleaming. "I saw the proof that the dream wasn't impossible, just ahead of its time. My time had passed. Yours had arrived. I didn't broker that deal to save Viridian or even just to help you. I did it to see the idea itself live, to see the Lunchbox win." It was the final, humbling twist. Alex hadn't just fought for his own future. He had carried the torch for a generation of innovators who had come before, who had imagined the solution but lacked the tools to build it. His victory was theirs, too. The event ended. Alex drove home to the suburbs, to his daughter and his quiet workshop. He still kept the original Lunchbox prototype on a shelf. It was a reminder of where it started, not with a boardroom, but with a father's love, a spoiled strawberry, and the stubborn refusal to believe something was impossible. He had walked into that corporate meeting risking everything for a home. He walked out having built something far greater, a legacy. The Lunchbox was no longer a joke. It was the key to a fresher, less wasteful future. And it all began with a simple, courageous decision to open the box and show them what was inside. Alex Rourke's story is a blueprint for something rare in our world. A clean victory, not a compromise that left everyone bitter, not a destruction of one side by the other, but a restructuring. He proved that integrity and desperation could be a stronger foundation than pure capital, that a lunchbox could hold more than food. It could hold leverage, hope, and the seeds of an entire industry. Today, Rourke Fresh Tech is valued at over $80 million. The Everfresh core is being integrated into supply chains across 3 continents, with consumer versions slated for next year. David Kiernan remains at Viridian, a chastened but wiser leader. Sarah Chen runs the joint venture with visionary efficiency. Marcus Thorne quietly left the company 6 months after the deal. And Nathaniel Croft, he remains a silent partner, satisfied that an old dream finally found its builder. But the real legacy isn't on a balance sheet. It's in the millions of pounds of produce that won't rot in transit. It's in the energy saved from reduced refrigeration. It's in the small farms that can now reach distant markets without fear of spoilage. And for Alex, it's in the health and security of his daughter, Chloe, who now has a father who is present, not perpetually panicked. So what's the lesson buried in this tale of a lunchbox? It's that the next world-changing idea probably isn't being developed in a shiny corporate lab. It's likely being built by someone in a garage, at a kitchen table, in a moment of frustration or love or sheer stubborn will. The question is never about the size of the idea, but the courage of the person holding it. Are they brave enough to open the box when everyone is expecting to laugh? The next time you see something that looks out of place, that seems too simple or too humble to matter, remember Alex Rourke. Remember that the future doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives quietly, carried in a plain metal box, asking only for a seat at the table. If you believe in stories where the underdog wins not by chance, but by character, hit that subscribe button. We find these narratives, the ones where courage meets a moment of chance, and we bring them to you every week. Thanks for watching.